Spoiler warning, the following is an in-depth analysis. If you haven't seen this film, you might want to before watching this review. Movie genres can be kind of weird things. We name them based on what the filmmakers are trying to make much more often than what they actually turn out to be. Sometimes, of course, they're impossible to classify, and other times they're misclassified or falsely advertised in the hopes of attracting certain demographics. But when a movie really does want to be the thing it's classified as, a pretty good test in judging its merits is to ask whether or not it really fits into that genre at all. For example, there are a lot of movies we call horror films, but does the label horror really apply if it isn't actually scary? Should a movie be called a thriller if nobody gets any thrills from watching it? There are really only a few genres where a movie is still inherently the thing it's called, even if it's not very effective at it. Musicals, for instance. Even if the music is terrible, the singing is atrocious, and the movie would be a lot better without the songs, a movie where people break out into song is always a musical. Action movies. If the story is woven around action scenes and the focus is primarily on the action, be it elaborate chase scenes or a couple guys smacking each other across the face with wooden swords, it's still an action movie. Doesn't matter if the action is actually any good. My Super Ex-Girlfriend is an attempt at merging two popular movie genres, the romantic comedy, already a blending of two standard genres, and the superhero movie, which is more of a subgenre of the action film. But at least to me, it isn't very effective at being any of those things. I'm not arguing that it shouldn't fall under the umbrellas of romantic comedy and superhero film, because that's what it bills itself as, and I don't know what else to call it. I'm just saying that I personally don't think it's very romantic or very funny, and I think that G-Girl is too selfish, manipulative, and nuts to be considered a real superhero. Despite being directed by veteran Ivan Reitman, My Super Ex-Girlfriend is a movie with a potentially fun premise and has little else going for it. The story is sloppy, easy, and uninventive. The jokes are one-note and unclever. I find the characters unlikable, and it's a really sexist movie. But it presents both its men and women as pathetic and exploits familiar stereotypes for both, so at least it's an equal opportunity sexist movie. I'm going to be as fair as I can about this film, but I want to get this out of the way right now. There's not going to be a lot of carefully thought-out analysis in this review. That would be silly, because you never want to dig for something that's not there, and I don't want to overthink something that has very little thought in it in the first place. My Super Ex-Girlfriend takes the basic formulas of romantic comedies and superhero movies, blends those together, and relies entirely on the innate cleverness of the initial idea without the proper story execution. What could have been a fun and thoughtful parody of both genres is a series of tired sex jokes inside of a story that seems confused as to exactly what kind of comedy it is, that seems to exist only to cash in on the mid-2000s superhero movie craze. As I've said before, comedy is hard to review because funny is so relative. This movie opened to mixed reviews, and 40% of the critics on Rotten Tomatoes seem to have found it funny enough to give it a fresh review. What do I know? Perhaps Uma Thurman and Luke Wilson are delivering this comedy just the right way, and I personally just don't find the situation funny. A neurotic, for no good reason, superpowered girl who freaks out because her new boyfriend seems interested in a female coworker and becomes extremely dangerous, using her powers to break his apartment, steal his car, and embarrass him at work, just isn't inherently funny to me. It might be a taste issue. And if you find these ideas funny just in and of themselves, then maybe there is an audience for this, and it's just not for me. I generally like my comedy smarter, jokes that play with language and are a little nuanced. But I can appreciate stupid comedy as well. I like a lot of the gags in Weird Al's UHF. I like Spaceballs. I don't totally hate Balls of Fury. So is it just that I don't like sex jokes, or was the problem in the presentation? Could this material have been delivered in a more thoughtful and credible way? I think so. Any story, especially in genre fiction, has to suspend the audience's disbelief. No matter how out there it is, we have to buy that in this universe, whatever happens is possible. The one big exception in comedy, of course, is farce. But if you're going to do a movie where the story is only secondary to the jokes, just a loose framework to give a context for silly gags, you have to establish that from the very beginning. In something like The Naked Gun, we know we're in a world where anything goes and there's no pre-established set of rules when Leslie Nielsen is holding both of the lady's arms so she won't hit him, and then a third one comes out from the middle to slap him in the face. Movies like that can get away with anything because absurdity is what they're about. They're not in the business of creating compelling characters, they're straight parodies of whatever kind of movie they're making fun of. I couldn't complain that Superhero Movie wasn't compelling enough or that it had stock characters. I just thought its jokes were too lazy. It relied too much on pop culture references and spoofing all the scenes of a single movie rather than branching out and really poking fun at the whole genre like its title suggested. But I have no reason to think that's the kind of movie this is supposed to be. It's a comedy, sure, but it doesn't establish itself as a total farce, just a romantic comedy where the love interest happens to be a psychotic superhero. As such, I feel like I should expect the story to, more or less, make sense. The universe is established at the beginning seems to be our world, plus the one big supernatural exception, a hero with superpowers. Very quickly, I find myself distracted by lazy plot contrivances and confusing story points. When Matt and Vaughn are talking about G-Girl on a really crowded bus with several women on it, Matt just happens to ask out Jenny, who is secretly G-Girl. Right after Jenny says no, a thief snatches her purse and runs off. Matt runs after him, winds up in a trash can, trying not to get pounded by the thief, and when he gets out of the trash can, he finds Jenny there instead of the thief, ready to accept his invitation, impressed with him for trying to save her, even though she, of course, is the one who actually saved him from that thief. So out of everyone on that train, Jenny is the girl Matt and Vaughn are ogling, and she's also the only person who gets her purse stolen. Also that the script can contrive a relationship between Jenny and Matt so we can have a story. They couldn't have met in some more interesting way. With the nerdy glasses, disguise, and G-Girl's power set, they're already taking nearly everything from Superman, so why not go all the way and just make her someone Matt meets at work? No one ever questions the unlikeliness that Clark Kent and Lois Lane would know each other, because if Superman has an alter ego, he's gonna have to work with people, and it's a natural way to start a relationship. I also think this story starts about a half hour too early. It's called My Super Ex-Girlfriend. Do we really need every step from their meeting to their first date to their breakup when the story is supposed to be about what happens after they break up? The status quo that should be established here is their dating life before they break up, not Matt's life before that. He's dating a superhero, he finds out she's a superhero, and now the story can get going. This thing's really stretching for time by starting here, and I think that's a really rookie writing mistake. Then you've got Professor Bedlam, who's a supervillain because everybody says he is. I kind of like the idea that because this is a romantic comedy, the bad guy turns to crime because the girl who became the superhero rejected him and now they're arch rivals, playing on the classic trope of the hero and villain who were once close friends. But while he's well known around New York as being the supervillain, we don't really know what terrible things he's done and no one seems to be after him. We see him do exactly 3 bad things the entire movie. He steals Jenny's hair for the machine he's building to extract her power. He hangs Matt upside down on top of the Statue of Liberty. I suspect this is a callback to Ghostbusters 2. And he accidentally kills one of his henchmen while trying to extract the powers from Jenny's hair and cut it with a saw. Emphasis there on accident. I suppose we're supposed to believe he must be really evil because he never even flinches when that happens. But the point is, I'd like to know what he's been doing all these years that's so terrible and illegal. After all, when he and Jenny make up at the end and decide to get together, he's just running around free, never having to go to jail for his crimes. And how does he hang Matt off the Statue of Liberty anyway? Aren't there guards there? Nobody saw him do that? But after Jenny and Matt break up and Jenny steals Matt's car at work and breaks a huge hole in the parking garage, police question him, so we know that there are police and they sometimes show up when illegal things happen. Why are there no police when Dr. Bedlam does something illegal? Is it because everyone has this false sense of security and they just expect G-Girl to fix everything for them? So when it seems like it's in her jurisdiction, they just expect her to solve it and nobody does anything about it? That kind of seems to be the case when a missile is headed for New York and is about to kill thousands of people, and because she's jealous of Matt and Hannah, she just sits there for a long time before she leaves the restaurant and does something about it. So maybe that's supposed to be the joke, that Bedlam gets away with everything as long as G-Girl doesn't show up because normal people just leave superhero business alone. But that's unclear. It's not the sort of thing I think is worth a lot of speculation. I just think the script is focused on the sex jokes and expects us not to question anything because it's a comedy. And maybe also because it's a superhero movie. And honestly, I wouldn't mind so much if I liked these characters and if I was laughing. But I've got nothing to fall back on here, so I can't help but notice that the way the main characters meet is stupid contrived, and that the bad guy gets away with everything and nobody seems to notice, despite the fact that they're constantly talking about him. I also think it's impossible to buy that Jenny ever kept a secret identity. She's not the slightest bit careful about anyone seeing her use her powers in public. She's careless, and being psychotic doesn't help. She saves a kid from getting hit by a car, tells her to look both ways before crossing the street, then backs up into traffic and gets hit herself. There are tons of people there watching as this happens, and Matt, of course, is freaking out, thinking she needs to go to the hospital. I guess that's supposed to be funny in a slapstick sort of way, but all I can think is, how has no one found out she's G-Girl before this? Heck, considering she's crazy and needy and ultra-controlling, how has she never been found out before this just dating people? She even forgets she's wearing her costume when she takes her clothes off in front of Matt. You can't tell me Matt is the first and only guy she's ever used her powers on in a jealous rage, considering how nuts she is. You kind of get the sense that she didn't just snap and get like this just now. She breaks a hole in his roof twice, tries to fry his goldfish, writes a derogatory word on his forehead with her laser vision, and breaks through a parking garage, stealing his car, and throws that into space. And then she has a huge fight with Hannah out in the open at the end. How does no one ever figure out who she is? Jenny's superhero alias is G-Girl. Toward the beginning of the film, while he's watching her put out a fire, Matt's misogynistic and sexually frustrated friend Vaughn speculates as to why they call her that, though it's hard to imagine they've never had this conversation before. And he throws out suggestions because of his immature and one-track mind, like Good Kisser, and the one I was dreading but I suppose was inevitable, G-Spot. This never pays off. I was really expecting some big reveal at the end about what the G in G-Girl actually stands for. It's never revealed. I wonder if it stands for generic. I did actually wonder for a minute if perhaps generic was the key word here, if maybe this movie was a lot more clever than I was realizing. I thought maybe it was being obvious and dull and unclever on purpose. I wondered if it was trying to be a satire on formulaic movies, like this is literally what we would get if you put the most stereotypical versions of these two types of movies together. You have the romantic comedy about the guy and the girl who lust after each other, but there's another girl involved who the guy is really in love with but can't have, and that starts a love triangle. Then eventually there's a huge feud and hilarity ensues as the two girls fight over the guy, until by the end, the guy gets that second girl who he really wanted in the first place, and the first girl finds out that a supporting male character, usually a shy or otherwise socially awkward guy who was there the whole time, has secretly been in love with her, and the four of them then live happily ever after. And then you have the superhero origin movie, where a regular person gets powers in some accident, is somehow responsible for creating his or her own arch nemesis. Time goes by and they stop a lot of unrelated crimes and natural disasters to show off their powers until the villain comes up with some way to take them out of the picture in the third act. The villain is defeated and the hero lives to fight another day. Now you merge those two stories and you've got this one, where the villain is reworked to be that socially awkward other male character who's secretly in love with the main female protagonist, and that second girl has to get superpowers of her own by the end so that the male protagonist, who, despite all the stupid stuff he does all movie, gets everything he ever wanted. The girl he thought was better than the one he was dating, and still the superpowered chick. So if they were simply trying to show how stale those formulas are by mixing them together, I suppose they succeeded at that, but it's more depressing than it is an entertaining commentary on the genres. The overall lighthearted tone, both in the general directing style and in the soundtrack, suggests that the movie really does think it's a fun romp in this world. It really plays like the director thinks everyone in the audience is laughing. But G-Girl stripping Matt naked during a presentation at work and all the gags about sexual harassment just don't do it for me. And understand, I really tried to give this the benefit of the doubt. I watched it twice just to make sure I wasn't missing something. I laughed in exactly two places. One is where G-Girl throws a shark at Hannah and Matt. That's so ridiculously absurd, and I can't say I've ever seen a shark out of water trying to kill people inside of an apartment. And of course, the jump the shark reference isn't lost on me. It made me kind of wish the whole movie was that completely off the hook. I absolutely would have enjoyed it more. When the ordeal is over, her delivery is priceless when Hannah ends the scene by looking at Matt and simply saying, "Why did G-Girl throw a shark at us?" The other scene I laughed at is with Professor Bedlam, played by Eddie Izzard, who was the one character I really started to like toward the end, and the one actor I thought was really having a good time in the role. He opens a refrigerator to show Matt the rock that he's going to use to steal G-Girl's powers. He says, "I've got something that will totally level the playing field." Matt says, "The rock?" And Bedlam says, "No, the ham, of course the rock." I could have used more moments like that. I really like the initial idea of the superhero everyone in the city trusts who turns out to be nuts and takes all of her frustrations out on an unsuspecting ex-boyfriend. There's a great commentary there about the toll superhero work would take on a person having to constantly put her own life on hold to put out fires or stop drug busts or avert natural disasters, and how difficult it would be to have a personal life. Maybe at first she does it because she's trying to be selfless, realizing that with her powers she's the only one who can. Maybe she even has aspirations of inspiring other people to do their part for their community and their environment, establishing herself as a symbol of hope and justice and responsibility like Superman. But those ideas are nowhere to be seen here. Instead, it's just a given that Jenny would become a superhero. Like, if you got powers, that's just naturally what you'd do. I could see someone like Jenny becoming disenfranchised with the world, doing this for years and never seeing any real change in people because of it. Maybe, as we've seen in comic series like Kingdom Come, or even Grant Morrison's recent Action Comics run, people don't trust G-Girl because she's too powerful, and they're afraid that at any moment she might snap and use her powers against people. And so because she's tired of getting no respect and still having to clean up everybody's messes for them, that's exactly what happens. She snaps. There are some very compelling potential motivations for superheroes who are under constant stress and constant scrutiny to lose perspective and stop being heroic. And as heavy as that all sounds, I still think it could work in a comedy. Where Matt discovers Jenny's G-Girl, and though she appears to be holding herself together as the superhero, she's at her wit's end, and it's something Matt does, maybe something totally harmless, that's the last straw for her. Well, I shouldn't rewrite the movie, but I think it's, once again, just lazy writing to have her so needy and clinging and jealous with no explanation whatsoever as to how she got that way. We know she used to be a nerd. Kids didn't like her in high school. She got powers, then she had the perfect body and everybody loved her, and apparently for no good reason, sometime later became a superhero. At what point did she lose her mind? I think the key to this kind of comedy is likable characters. Look at other Ivan Reitman movies. Ghostbusters isn't funny because of the individual gags, it's funny because of how characters were made to deliver those lines and act in those scenes. Characters like Peter Venkman have inherent flaws which allow them to do outrageous things we don't immediately approve of, like conducting an ESP test and falsifying the cute girl's data to make her think she's legitimately telepathic while shocking the guy while he's actually getting some right answers. But throughout the film, Peter comes alive and shows real charm and empathy. So even though he's a skirt chaser, it's easier to laugh at him because of his sympathetic qualities. But I don't like any of these people, and so the jokes fall flat. Vaughn is a sex addict, and that's his entire defining character trait. The end. Matt is supposed to be the lovable idiot who's slow on the uptake, but his heart's in the right place. The trouble is, his heart's not in the right place. He goes out with Jenny one time, calls her weird, calls her neurotic, and then goes out with her again in the hopes of having sex with her. Then he has sex with her, and because she broke his bed, he goes out with her again, even though she's increasingly freaking him out. He doesn't really like her, he knows he's not in love, but he says, when you get on the greatest roller coaster of your life, you get back on. That's all she is to him, a ride, despite repeatedly claiming they, quote, had something special. And he says crass things like the first time they sleep together and he sees her in lingerie, he says, that's what I call structural integrity. There's nothing for me to like about this guy. And it really doesn't help that Vaughn guy is his best friend. When he finally breaks it off with her because she's getting too neurotic for the sex to be worth it and she starts ruining his life, I can't find it in me to feel for him because he was stupid enough to get in bed with her. And I know some of you are saying it's an intentionally stupid comedy, he's supposed to be like that, but I can't help but feel like the movie wants me to be emotionally invested in this guy, and if it does, it needs to work a lot harder for me to care. And while Matt's a pig who pretends he's not and gets into bad relationships because he only dates for sex, which, by the way, is how it works, fellas. If you only date for sex, you're never going to have a good relationship. Maybe that's supposed to be the moral of this story. But anyway, the women are just as superficial. Both of them, Jenny and Hannah, are written as though there's a signal a man can send into a woman's body that will flip a switch and automatically make her throw herself at the guy. And that switch is the phrase, I love you. Jenny obsessively awaits Matt's utterance of that phrase as they're dating, and he's clearly weirded out by her constantly, even after learning her secret identity, and when he finally claims he's madly in love with her, a lie he tells her in the third act after he's teamed up with Professor Bedlam to help strip her of her powers, she magically throws herself at him and buys it, regardless of how obvious a trap it is. How could she possibly believe he'd still be interested in her after she ruined his career and threw a shark at him? But I guess she is the totally psychotic one. Right after that, she says she's glad she didn't kill him, so her actions don't have to make sense. Okay, what about Hannah, the typical other girl who's supposed to be the stable one Matt should choose but has difficulty doing it because G-Girl is so hot and has superpowers? At the end of the movie, when Matt finally reveals that he's actually been in love with her the whole time, she too just instantly throws herself at him without a second thought. It doesn't matter that he dated another girl just for sex or that he helped the supervillain manipulate the superhero who saved the city countless times so he can help him get rid of her superpowers for his own gain. That's what girls are like in this universe. Just say those 3 magic words and you can get them to do anything. And it works again on Jenny when Bedlam says it. Bedlam, who she lost complete interest in back in high school, who's been her mortal enemy now for years, and who suddenly reveals that all the allegedly terrible supervillainous things he's done has been because she spurred him. This guy finally says, "I love you," and apparently the crazy spell is over. Everybody becomes friends. Nobody questions G-Girl still being a superhero after all the unnecessary property damage she caused in her jealous rage and, trying to kill people. And I guess the audience is supposed to think she's totally stable now, too, because she and Hannah, who now has powers, fly off to save the day together at the end, and that's it. Love conquers all, I guess, is the message. But it comes off more like, deep down, women are insecure and insane, and they need male companionship so they're not dangerous. It's pretty offensive, but at least everybody sucks, and it's not just sexist toward one gender or the other. Lastly, I'm confounded by the fact that this movie has a PG-13 rating instead of an R. All over the place, the raunchy jokes seem to want to go further, but it's trying so hard not to be an R film. The language goes as far as it can without dropping an F-bomb to keep that rating, and I really got the feeling that car spinning in space was supposed to say F you rather than you suck. I'm not saying I would have liked it more, but at least it would have been more definitely for adults had it gone all the way for raunchy or comedy. Being a superhero movie, it really should have. No matter what it is, superhero always screams okay for kids, and it especially did before Watchmen. I don't think I'd feel comfortable letting a 13-year-old watch this movie, much less a younger kid. I'm going to give my Super Ex-Girlfriend a 0.5 out of 4. I really wish the title had been a double entendre, like she's both super and a really cool and fun and likable character. I may be coming off like I'm taking this way too seriously, and I can't believe I wrote a review over 20 minutes, but quite the contrary. I like the initial concept of this movie, and if it wanted to be a complete over-the-top farce, it could have been, and I probably would have liked it more. But I felt like I was supposed to like these people for some reason. It made me constantly question its premise, and ultimately, I just couldn't find a way to have a good time with it. This needed the story credibility and also the imagination of other superhero parodies like Mystery Men or Sky High.